Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and in today's video I have the latest Simon Says stamp kit. This is the November 2018 Thanks and Leaves kit, and when I first opened the package I was a bit sort of like, ooh, so exciting, because I'm just going to cut straight to it. Look at these butterflies. Aren't these just gorgeous? These are metallic butterflies that you can fix to projects, and they are really solid. And each is different. There are 6 and they're all very, very different. So I want to experiment to see how we can change that colour. I mean, in the silver it's great, but if you want to make it a specific colour to match your project, I'm going to see what ideas we can come up with for using those. But that's a full set and I think they're terrific. Then there is the lollipop. We put that to one side because that's mine. There are some large sequins in a nice gold colour. There is also a full pack of small talk ideology phrases and sayings. This one is called snarky or impertinent, and some of these are really funny. I had a little look through and some of them really did make me laugh, like who left the bag of idiots open? So some of these comments are really, hey train wreck, this isn't your station. So these are going to be quite fun to use and incorporate into cards. There's loads of pages of these on a white background and a black background, so that's great. The stamp, this is another really large stamp, and this is called Thanks and Leaves, and as you can see there are lots of sentiments to match the season and some really lovely leaves, and we're going to experiment a lot with the leaves because there is no printed or patterned paper in this kit. So the challenge with this kit is going to be making backgrounds for cards, and the leaves are going to play a big part in that. There are a couple of tags. These are really nice thick tags. There are a couple of craft envelopes. I really like the size of these. These are smaller than standard. There's a standard beautiful pearlized envelope included, and if I put them together you can see the difference in size. And there are 4 sheets of cardstock in seasonal colours, in orange, green, craft and white. So what I'm going to do normally, I cut these, I cut them down the middle and then fold them in the top, and that gives me my card bases. What I'm going to do with these is cut them this way, so I get 4 sheets of paper out of each card, and I'm doing that because I'm mindful that we have to make our own backgrounds for this kit. So that's going to be great fun. Let's see how we will make 10 cards using this kit. So naturally the first thing I'm reaching for is one of the metal butterflies, and I'm going to show you a way to change the colour on this using white gesso. White gesso is very useful to give tooth to a project, so if you've got a shiny surface or something that isn't going to take a paint or a wax or a colour very easily, white gesso is a way of priming the surface so that it will take a colour. And I'm giving this 2 coats, so I've given it 1 coat, I'll let it dry, I'll give it a 2nd coat. You can also dry this off faster with your heat gun, but just remember not to pick it up after you've had the heat gun on it because it is metal. I'm taking a wax. Now all of the waxes that I use will be listed below the video so you can see what they are and where I got them. And I'm adding this beautiful burgundy wax, and I'm going to burnish that on with a little cloth and encourage the colour to go deeper into the butterfly, into all the little cracks and creases in the butterfly shape. This will be a white top folding card, and I've also taken one of the pieces of craft card and I've cut a square aperture from the centre of it, and I'm going to save the centre and I'll use it later. I've got some craft foam and I'm going to use this to cut down slices that will fit small enough onto the reverse of my frame, and then I'm going to glue them into place. I like using craft foam. It's really flexible, it's really easy to cut, and you can cut it exactly as required to your project. Now I'm going to glue this onto my white base card. So although it looks like I'm making a shaker card, I'm not. I'm just using the frame and I'm raising it up ever so slightly because that will complement the butterfly. The butterfly is having foam pads added to the back of that, so that will help me not just stick it on, but also give extra dimension to my card. And my frame around the outside will complement that height. That's going absolutely central to my card because I just think it's such a beautiful element. It's so nice. And now I'm taking one of the comments from the Snarky Crazy Talk booklet, and I'm taking the phrase that says "I am fabulous" because I think that fits really nicely with my butterfly. My card is complete. We're going to use the leaves to make a nice background for card 2. I've mounted 3 of the smallest leaves on one of my round acrylic blocks. Again, I will list those below the video. And I've got some Simon Says stamp ink from a previous kit. This is a clear ink, and this will give a watermark effect on your card. So I'm going to cover the entire card, and then I'm going to take a white side folding card and I'm going to glue my background onto my white base card. I've taken the larger of the sentiments that says, "In this season of Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for you," and I've used some white embossing powder and I've heat set that. I've also mounted it onto a piece of the orange card that came as part of the kit, and I'm using my foam sheets again to add a little bit of extra dimension to this sentiment because this is going to simply sit in the middle of my card and it's going to be raised up ever so slightly, so that gives the card a little bit of extra interest and dimension. And that's it, my card is complete. If you want, you could add leaves, you could cut them out and stick them onto the card, but for us, that's done. For card 3, this is very, very simple. I've cut a white panel and I've got the tallest of the leaf stamps, and I'm taking 3 colours that I think are complementary to the kit. I've got a green, a burgundy and a sort of a burnt umber, and all I'm doing is stamping up 3 of those leaves in such a way that they look like trees. Now I'm taking the sentiment that says "Sending Hugs" and I'm stamping that in black below my 3 little leaves or leafy trees, and I'm going to use my craft foam again to mount that onto a piece of white backing. That will go onto a piece of craft card and then that will go on my white top folding base card. I've got some raffia and I'm just going to tie that around the bottom of my panel because that will add a little bit of extra interest and cut off any excess that I don't want, and then I will assemble the card and glue it all together. Even though this is one of the simplest cards that I've made using this kit, I think this is my favourite. It's so simple, it's just so sweet. For card 4, I've broken out my stash of watercolour pencils and I've got a piece of white card and spritzed it with water, and I'm using a water brush to flick the colour from the end of the pencil tip onto my white card. I want to start with a fuzzy background, which is why I've put water on my card. This is a watercolour card, by the way. And then by drying the card off and continuing to add splatters from my pencil, I'll get better defined splashes, if that makes sense. Once my background card is finished and is dried off, I'm going to take some white VersaFine ink and one of the branches from the kit, and I'm going to add that as decoration around the outside of my card base. It's going to become like a border of leaves, and as you can see, I've used a variety of leaves and branches from the kit. Just use whatever feels right for you. I've gone with black as well. You could go with brown or green, whichever you feel is most appropriate to your card. I've taken one of the sentiments, this is one of the longer sentiments, and I've left a gap deliberately in the centre of my card so that I can fit that sentiment in the centre. That beautiful pearlised envelope had to be used for something, so I'm going to use it, rather than as an envelope, I'm going to use it to create some leaves, and I want these leaves to have, I didn't want the orange from the kit, it seemed a little too strong. The pearlised orange peachy colour is absolutely perfect. So I've stamped 2 leaves on with black ink and I'm going to cut those out. I'm going to add foam pads to the reverse of them, and then I'm going to stick them in the top right and the bottom left corner of my card base. You see that little mark on the top left of the card that I'm adding the glue to? I always make a note when I've got watercolour card that I've cut down to size. I always put a little mark on the reverse just saying WC so I know it's watercolour card. And once I've added that to my white side folding card, my card is complete. I've moved on to my craft mat because card 5 is going to get a little bit messy. I spritzed a piece of watercolour card with water and now I'm adding dry pigment. Now these come by various different names. I'm using a mixture of Brusho's and Ken Oliver's dried pigments, and these are quite good fun for getting different effects. The one I'm using here happens to be a liquid copper from Ken Oliver's range because I'm trying to go for an autumn colour. Once you've added them to your card, you can spritz them with water, you can move them around, and you can get some very dramatic effects. When you're happy with what you have, just dry it off. I decided that this wasn't quite as autumny as I wanted it to be, so I'm going to bring in a green pigment and add that into some of the gaps, and I'll spritz that with water and I'll dry that off as well. Once I've got my card base, I'm going to take some of the leaves from the kit and I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp Clear embossing ink, and I'm going to add these leaves to my background, and I'm going to use white embossing powder and I'm going to heat set them. And I'm also going to use gold embossing powder on my sentiment, which is going onto plain white card, and I'm going to heat set that as well. I've added craft foam to the reverse of my sentiment, and now I'm sticking it down onto a piece of white card. This is just plain white card, but it helps to give it a little extra false border. And now I'm going to glue this down onto my card. This is a white top folding card. I've already cut down a piece from my pattern paper that we made at the beginning of this card, and when I glue my sentiment on top of that, the card is complete. I'm staying on my craft mat for card 6. Again, it's going to be messy. This time I'm using Distress Oxides, and I'm using 3 different colours. I've got a carved pumpkin, I've got, I think it's amber, and I've got a dark green. The colours don't really matter, just use whatever you have, whatever says autumn to you. I've spritzed these with water, and I'm going to pick up some of the colour on a piece of white card. When I'm happy with that, I'll heat set it so that the colours don't run any further. This will go on a piece of white top folding card, but before I attach my pattern paper, I'm going to take a black marker pen and I'm going to run around the outside of my card to make a thin black border. These are all just different ways that you can add interest to your kit when you don't have pattern paper. I'm going back to my butterflies. I'm selecting one, and this time I'm going to use a black gesso. I happen to have this on my shelf, and I want to show you as many different ways of colouring these butterflies as you can. I do have another technique coming up in one of my future cards to show you as well, so it's not just all about the gesso. I have some beautiful gold wax which I'm adding to my butterfly here. I always use a glove when I'm applying my waxes, because otherwise the wax can get into your fingertips and can stain them, or some of them are scented and you might not want that scent on your skin. I've got my butterfly ready. It's been burnished now and it's a beautiful gold colour, and I'm taking one of the snarky sentiments. This says something along the lines of I'm winging it with my life, with my eyeliner, with everything, and I've added some foam pads to the back of my butterfly and I'm sticking that down onto my card as well. I want to use my sequins, so I'm just going to lay those out in a sort of pattern that works for me. When I'm happy, I'll add my glue and I'll attach the sequins to my card, and that way my card is complete. I want to use a sentiment on my tag for card 7, and I'm going to use the sentiment that says thank you, but I need to cut it down so that it will fit on my tag. So that's what I'm doing here, and it's not a problem. I can reassemble my sentiment for the future in its original layout if I need to. To make sure I get the layout on the tag exactly where I want it, I'm actually putting the sentiment onto my tag and then adding it to my block. This way I know that it is going to be exactly in the place that I want it to be. To check that, I'm going to ink it up with some black, and I'm just going to test it on a piece of card, and it's absolutely perfect. I've taken a piece of craft card from the kit and I've cut out a rectangle from the centre. I'm going to reserve that for our next card, and now I have a white top folding card and I'm going to use the remains of that craft card as a frame. I've cut down one of the tags so it will fit within this frame, and we're going to decorate the tag. I'm using a mixture of orange, green and sort of amber coloured inks here. Don't get hung up on which ones I'm using, use whatever you have in your stash. And because I want this to be a muted background, I'm knocking off the colour onto my yellow scrap card underneath, as you can see. So this is second and third variation stamping going onto my tag. Now I'm using one of my really cheap oral swabs, foam on a stick, to add some green to the outside of that tag and give it a little bit of a border. I'm taking my sentiment and I'm inking it up with black ink, and that's going to go straight onto my tag. And as you can see, because the background is muted, the thank you stands out really nicely and it isn't hidden or disguised by the leaves. I've got some raffia and I'm going to tie that around the top of my tag, and I'm also going to pop some through that little hole as well. And when I'm happy with everything, I'm going to add a little bit of craft foam card, as always, to the reverse of my tag. I'm going to glue that into position, then I'm going to glue that onto my card. And with that, my card will be complete. For this card, I'm using that piece of craft card that I cut from the centre of my frame. I'm going to add some repositionable tape, and I'm going to put it into the centre of a white top folding card. I've got my same inks again, and again I'm knocking off that top piece of ink so that it's not as intense by the time it's stamped onto my card, and I'm going to go all around my card with a variety of the tiny little stamps and those three colours. When I've covered my background, my frame, I'm going to use my green swab to go around the outside of the card and also around the outside of that craft card. That's important because you need to have a defined central space. Once I'm happy with everything, I can knock off that repositionable tape and it's ready for me to stamp onto. I'm going to use the sentiment that I used before. I haven't taken it off my block, and I know it will fit in this card because we know that it fitted on the previous card. And with that, the card is finished. Nice and simple. For card 9, we're thinking a little bit outside of the box. I've got a piece of white top folding card, and I've also got a piece of cream card. But before I do anything to my design, I'm going to take a red ink, and I'm going to use one of my swabs again. I'm going to add a tiny thin little border of red around the outside of my white top folding card. And you can see when I put my cream card on the top, I've got a lovely thin red border. I've taken a piece of waste paper and I've folded it in half, and I'm cutting out a large curve. The reason I folded it over is just if I need any extra in future, it's already cut out. Now I'm taking the longest of the leaves. This is a thin, narrow, long leaf, and I've got three colours, and I'm going to stamp my leaf with just the pointy bit sticking out, and when I take it away you can see it looks like bunting. So we're making a card using bunting, and to join the bunting up I have fine black marker pen, and I will add my sentiment in black, and then all that remains for me to do is to glue that to the front of my white top folding card with the red border. For card 10, we're going back to the butterflies again. I've got a piece of watercolour paper, and I'm going to flood part of this, a very controlled area of this, with water. I'm using my water brush pen to try and achieve this. I don't want the water to spill anywhere other than the central lower 2/3 of the card. So I'm just applying it as if it's paint, but actually it's just water. The reason that I'm doing that is because I'm going to be using some Zig Clean Colour watercolour pens. I've got a black, a deep purple and a deep blue, and I'm going to add splashes of ink to the top of my waterline, and I'm going to encourage the colours to flow down the front of the card. I want them to be no wider than my butterfly. When I'm happy with that, I'm going to glue it to the front of a white top folding card, and I have a different way to colour up my butterfly. This time I'm going to use some silver wax to colour the final result with, but to colour it I'm using a black marker pen. So I'm using a Copic pen. You could use whatever alcohol marker you have. When it's thoroughly blacked and thoroughly dried, I'm going to add the smallest little bit of silver. I just want to pick up the detailed elements on this butterfly, and I've chosen the butterfly that's got lots of raised little dots. I'm using a soft cloth to burnish off the remains of the wax, and you can see on my little cloth you do get quite a lot off your butterfly, and it does give it a lovely shimmer. I've got some foam pads, and I'm going to add 2 of these to reverse of my butterfly, and then I'm going to glue my butterfly to the top of the coloured effect. I'm going to faff around a little bit with this until I decide exactly where I want it positioned, and then I'm going to choose one of my snarky sentiments. This sentiment is slightly longer than I need it to be, so I'll just cut it down, and then I'm going to take a moment just to decide if I want it at the top or the bottom of my card. This sentiment reads, "I have absolutely no desire to fit in." I think it works quite nicely with the idea of a black butterfly. To complete my card, I'm going to take my fine black pen and add a couple of lines down either side of my card, And then I'm going to add clusters of 3 little dots. This is a lovely little effect, and I find this really useful when you want to add in little gaps and fill little spaces. Once I've done all of my little dots, I'm going to add some definition to my sentiment just by adding some black lines underneath it. I just wanted it to stand out a little bit more. And with that, my card is complete. So I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm going to leave you with some music and some close-ups of all the cards that we've made today. And until we meet again, take care.